Rain poured heavily over the streets of London as angry voices echoed outside the Old Bailey courthouse. "Please, Your Honor." The cry came from a woman so desperate her entire body shook. Inside the courtroom, 19-year-old Marcus Hill stood frozen beside his lawyer while tears rolled down his exhausted face. Judge Richard Whitmore stared down at him without emotion. The courtroom already knew what was coming. Richard Whitmore was famous across London, not because people admired him, because people feared him. Newspapers called him the Iron Judge, the man who never showed mercy, the man who destroyed lives with a single sentence. Marcus swallowed nervously. "Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong, but my little sister hasn't eaten properly in days. My mom is sick. I was trying to help my family."
Please,
Richard
Your Honor,
adjusted his
have
glasses
mercy on me.
slowly. The court is
didn't mean
not
for any of
interested
this
in
to happen.
emotional excuses. Marcus' mother burst into tears. "He's a good boy." "Sit down," Richard snapped. The entire courtroom became silent. Even Marcus' lawyer looked defeated. "Your Honor," the lawyer said carefully, "my client has no criminal history. He works part-time and supports his family. We ask the court for leniency." Richard leaned back in his chair. The law exists because society collapses when people believe desperation excuses crime. Marcus looked completely broken. "I was hungry," he whispered. Richard's face remained cold. 5 years imprisonment. Gasps filled the courtroom instantly. Marcus's mother screamed. "No!" Marcus collapsed into tears as guards grabbed him. "You're ruining my life!" Marcus cried. Richard picked up his gavel. "Case closed." The loud bang echoed across the room. Outside the courthouse, reporters immediately surrounded citizens protesting against Richard Whitmore. "He has no heart," one man shouted. "He treats poor people like animals," another woman yelled. But Richard ignored all of it. He walked calmly toward his luxury black car while cameras flashed around him. "Judge Whitmore," one reporter shouted, "do you believe your sentencing is too harsh?" Richard stopped briefly. "The law is not designed to comfort criminals." Then he entered the car. As the vehicle drove away through rainy London streets, Richard looked out the window without emotion. To him, weakness created chaos, mercy created criminals, and fear kept society under control. Or at least that was what he believed. An hour later, Richard arrived at his massive mansion in West London. The gates opened automatically. The house looked more like a palace, expensive cars, beautiful gardens, tall windows glowing warmly from inside. Yet the moment Richard stepped into the house, silence swallowed him. No laughter, no family, no warmth, only emptiness. A housekeeper approached nervously. "Good evening, sir." Richard barely looked at her. "Where's dinner?" "In the dining room, sir." He walked away without another word. The woman quietly lowered her head. Even the workers feared him. Richard sat alone at a massive dining table built for 10 people, but only one chair was occupied. He poured himself a glass of whiskey while the television played quietly nearby. A news reporter appeared on screen. Public outrage continues after Judge Richard Whitmore sentenced another teenager to prison earlier today. Images of Marcus' crying mother filled the television. "She begged the court for mercy," the reporter continued. "Many citizens believe the judge's punishments are excessively harsh." Richard scoffed. "People always defend criminals," he muttered. Suddenly, his phone rang. The screen showed one name. "Emily, his daughter," Richard answered immediately. "Emily?" Her voice sounded distant. "I only called because tomorrow is Mum's birthday." Richard swallowed hard. "I remember." A long silence followed, then Emily spoke again. "I saw the news today," Richard sighed. "I did my job." "No," Emily replied sharply. "You destroyed another family." Richard's jaw tightened. "He committed a crime. He stole food," Emily shouted. "There's a difference between evil people and desperate people." Richard stood up angrily. "The law cannot survive if judges become emotional." Emily laughed bitterly. "You know what your problem is, Dad." Richard remained silent. "You've spent so much time judging people that you forgot how to understand them." The words hit him harder than he expected. But before he could respond, Emily ended the call. Richard stared at the phone quietly. Then his eyes drifted toward an old family photograph sitting beside the fireplace, himself. His late wife, young Emily, smiling happily. That was years ago, before the coldness consumed him, before his marriage collapsed, before his daughter stopped visiting. Richard quickly looked away and drank more whiskey. Emotions irritated him. Later that night, heavy thunder shook the mansion. Richard sat in his office reviewing case files while rain battered the windows. One particular file caught his attention. Marcus Hill, 19 years old. Part-time supermarket worker, no father, sick mother, caring for younger sister. Richard stared at the file longer than expected. Then suddenly a violent pain shot through his chest. He grabbed the table. His breathing became heavy. The whiskey glass slipped from his hand and shattered across the floor. Richard stumbled backward. Another sharp pain hit him. His vision blurred. He collapsed. Darkness swallowed everything. When Richard slowly opened his eyes again, something felt terribly wrong. The ceiling above him was cracked and stained. Water dripped slowly into a bucket nearby. Traffic noises echoed through thin walls. Confused, Richard sat up quickly. This was not his mansion. The room was tiny, cold, poor. "What is this place?" he whispered. He looked down at his hands and froze. They were different. Younger, darker, rough from hard labor. Panic rushed through him instantly. A weak elderly woman entered the room carrying grocery bags. "Daniel?" she asked softly. Richard stared at her. "Who are you?" The woman looked confused. "Daniel. Are you all right?" Richard stumbled toward a cracked mirror hanging on the wall. The reflection staring back at him was not Judge Richard Whitmore. It was a young black man in his 20s, thin, exhausted, tired. Richard backed away in horror. "No, no," the elderly woman hurried toward him. "You're scaring me." Richard touched his unfamiliar face desperately. "What's happening to me?" The woman looked frightened. "You've been sick for 2 days. Maybe the fever affected your memory." Richard turned toward her slowly. "Who am I?" The woman's eyes filled with sadness. "You're my son," she whispered. "Daniel Carter." Richard's heart pounded violently. Nothing made sense. But deep inside, fear slowly began growing. Because for the first time in his life, Judge Richard Whitmore was no longer the powerful man in control. And things were about to get much worse. If you're enjoying this emotional story so far, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below where you're watching from. It's because this story is only getting started. The following morning, Richard woke up, hoping everything had been a nightmare, but the tiny apartment remained exactly the same. Rainwater still leaked from the ceiling. The walls still smelled damp, and the weak elderly woman still lay coughing heavily in the next room. Richard sat silently on the mattress, trying to understand what was happening. Then he noticed photographs hanging beside the door. Daniel Carter, the man whose body he now occupied. Pictures showed Daniel smiling beside his mother, working delivery jobs, standing in crowded London streets, living a completely different life from Richard's. The elderly woman slowly entered the room. "You should get ready for work." Richard looked confused. "Work? We can't afford for you to miss another day." An hour later, Richard found himself riding the underground train surrounded by exhausted workers. Nobody looked happy. Nobody looked hopeful. Everyone looked tired. As the train stopped suddenly, a wealthy businessman beside Richard quickly moved his briefcase away and stared suspiciously at him. Richard noticed immediately. For the first time in his life, someone looked at him with fear instead of respect. When Richard arrived at the office building where Daniel worked, the manager immediately began shouting. "You're late again." Richard checked the clock, only 3 minutes late. "Sorry," he said quietly. The manager rolled his eyes. "People like you always have excuses." Those words irritated Richard instantly. Yet everyone around simply continued working silently. Nobody defended him. Nobody cared. For hours, Richard cleaned office floors while wealthy employees ignored him completely. Some dropped trash beside him without acknowledgement. Others spoke about expensive holidays while Richard struggled to breathe from exhaustion. At lunchtime, he searched Daniel's pockets. Almost no money, just enough for cheap bread and tea. That evening, Richard worked a second job delivering food through freezing London rain. His body ached, his hands trembled from cold, and every moment felt humiliating. While waiting outside a luxury apartment building, Richard watched wealthy families eating dinner together through large, glowing windows. Laughter, warmth, happiness, things money could protect. Suddenly, he remembered Marcus, the teenager he sentenced. For the first time, Richard wondered what Marcus's life truly looked like before that courtroom. The thought disturbed him deeply. Later that night, Richard returned to Daniel's apartment exhausted. His mother sat coughing weakly at the small kitchen table. "Did you eat?" Richard asked. She smiled gently. "I'm fine," but Richard immediately noticed untouched medication bottles beside her. "You haven't taken your medicine?" The woman lowered her eyes. We can't afford another refill. Richard froze. How long? A few weeks. His chest tightened painfully. In his old life, he spent more money on whiskey in 1 week than this woman needed to survive. That realization haunted him.